It's the episode you've all been waiting for. We've broken down the new stats that could potentially be coming to fantasy rugby in the MLR, and now it's time to put it all together to see the impact that it has on our fantasy rankings. A sneak peek, you might say, into what fantasy Major League Rugby might look like in 2023. The Fantasy Ruckers show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 41 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. Matt Yee, Devin Vanderpool, Ryan Yee here with you as always to continue that journey moving forward. And guys, we got a jam-packed and exciting episode in this one. We've been teasing, I feel like, for weeks and weeks that we were going to finally put it all together. All those numbers that we were crunching over the past few weeks, over the past couple months, we're going to put it all together, do a little bit of maths, and punch out some new fantasy rankings for the people here. You guys excited to see what that looks like?
Stats. That's all I got to say.
There we go. Well, hey, if you aren't already, make sure you're following us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. You can find us there. That's where you're going to find all the latest on fantasy rugby in the MLR, as well as getting first to know if, hey, we expand this thing, if there's open spots, new teams, new leagues, new potential for more people to join this whole fantasy rugby thing in Major League Rugby. That's where you're going to hear it first. So make sure you're following us there. And that's also where you're going to see all the latest episodes. Comes out every single Wednesday, every single week, all the latest things on fantasy rugby. Well, hey guys, I got a little bit of a surprise here for our video watchers.
Whoa.
Sorry for the podcast listeners, you ain't gonna get anything too much in this one, but for our video listeners, we're adding a little bit of style here into our shows now. Give you guys you guys don't have to just deal with Matt's and Vandy's pretty faces the whole time. You're now gonna have a little bit of graphics here, so we're gonna go through here. I want to get to know what the listeners and viewers all think about this whole thing and this new setup here in this episode number 41. Thought it was a good way to introduce that in this big episode when it comes to stats. So let's get it all started here with our very first segment here with the Ask TFR show question. And every single week we ask the people what they want to know about fantasy rugby, and it's a nice little way to kind of get people introduced, to get people in the know and join this fantasy rugby wave. And yes, Matt, you're impressed with the new graphic here. We got the question up on the screen. And this
podcast listeners, you can't see it.
The Ask TFR show question for this week: what excites you most about adding more stats to fantasy rugby in the MLR? We're going to break it down in this episode, but before we get to it, to kind of get the people's taste buds going, guys, what are you excited for about our conversation today about more stats in the world of fantasy MLR?
Stats are king, baby. Stats are king. More stats you get, the better your throne.
No, that's not a saying, Vandy. Good effort, though. That's not a saying. More stats,
beer yet. Okay.
More stats, more points, more fun, more dubs for Matt E. That's what I love to hear.
There we go. Yeah, no, definitely. Adding more stats will definitely add more points into the mix. That's for sure. Vandy, I thought that was going to be your answer in this one, but I guess Matt stole it.
Look, this is where I shine, guys.
You said before we get to that question, are you excited about our talk today?
No, this is the question. What are you talking about? Our conversation today.
Andy, this is the whole graphic. This is the graphic.
What are you
All the podcast listeners have no idea that there's a graphic right now, and there's a graphic right in front of your face that you can read. But there's podcast listeners out there that can't see this graphic, and you just taking advantage of being able to see it. You don't even understand the privilege that you have to be able to read this question on the screen. What a yoke!
All I'm gonna say is, everybody listening to this episode, listen to what Ryan said.
What a yoke.
Comment on the socials about how he was wrong and I was right. Now, my answer to that TFR show
is a yoke.
More stats, more points, tighter pants.
Matt already said it. We're moving on. All right, let's move on here. Ask TFR show question. I don't know, kind of off the rails there, but yeah, I agree, Matt. More points, more stats is really stuff. I think for my answer to this question, because Vandy can't seem to coherently put together an answer to a question. What do you mean just watch? You didn't say. I said the Ask TFR show question.
First of all, we gotta listen, not watch.
All right. But my answer to this question is the more dynamic, the aspects of rugby being joined into the game. If you're introducing more stats, there's gonna be more elements. We talked about hitting, we talked about breakdown steals, we talked about turnovers. When we get to interject this type of stuff into fantasy rugby, it adds a little bit of a deeper element into the game, and also kind of reflects the actual game of rugby itself, which is what we want to do. And the more you reflect the game,
the more you reflect the game, the better new people can learn the game because they're learning all facets of the game. And the better I'm going to do because I kind of know rugby.
Do you?
Sure.
No.
Whatever your last year tell you.
But hey, maybe that'll be the mix, Matt. Maybe just adding a little bit more stats, being able for you to interject your expertise a little bit is definitely going to be something that could play into your advantage in the upcoming year. But hey, lots of stuff to get to in this episode. Just wanted to throw that question out there as we break it down in this episode. And hey, if you got a question for Matt, if you got a question for Vandy, next time I'm sure Vandy will listen to it a little bit better and answer to it,
and he'll read
a little bit better. But hey, if you got a question for us, make sure you hit us up on socials at those handles that I mentioned earlier at the Fantasy Ruckers, and use the hashtag AskTFRShow, and that's where you'll be able to get those questions answered and learn a little bit more about fantasy rugby in the MLR. Well, with that being said, and before we get to the breakdown of all those great stats and all that stuff that's going to drastically shift the rankings in our fantasy rugby landscape in the MLR, there's some big news to break down, guys, and we gotta get to it right away. Before we get to some of the roster moves that have happened over the week or so, there's no missing the statement that has finally been released by the MLR and the saga that is the Giltinis and the Gilgronis and Adam Gilchrist that's involved in all of it may be coming to an end, as the Gilgronis and the Giltinis will no longer be in the MLR. In a statement released by Major League Rugby on October 25th, they say that the MLR 2023 season will now feature 12 teams in a two-conference competition. 11 of the teams that competed in 2022 will be returning for the 2023 campaign. And interestingly enough, there will be a 12th team that will be added to the mix as an expansion team. Neither the Austin Gilgronis nor the LA Giltinis will participate in 2023. So guys, a little bit of a closed chapter here to what has been, it feels like, a long saga to this whole debacle when it comes to the Gilgronis and Giltinis. Initial reaction to MLR's statement here and having some clarity finally moving forward here, what 2023 might look like for Major League Rugby.
I mean, look, I think we seriously need to have a moment of silence for the Gilgronis and the Giltinis, and just sit back as I say some fine words about these two franchises and how they've come to an end. Look, I put on my black collar shirt for this event because these two teams mean a lot to the MLR. Now, you hate to see them go. You hate to see them go. What a bunch of weapons. But look,
I'd love to see him leave.
When you are Adam Gilchrist, there are two things that you can do. You can die a hero, or you can live long enough to become the villain. And Mr. Gilchrist, you became a hero of the MLR, but you are now a villain of the MLR. And Gilchrist and Giltinis and Gilgronis are now in the past.
Wow.
May they rest in peace.
That was really, really good. I got to give you a round of applause for that one, Matt. That actually makes a lot of sense. Honestly, yes. To put it in simple terms, Adam Gilchrist was a huge part in the starting of this MLR. The amount of finances and stuff that he interjected into this league was massive. The hand that he had in the cookie jar in terms of getting this kind of spurred and getting this to become a reality was a large part of with his help. But yeah, you're right. You're in it long enough. enough, and you may become the villain, and that's what it seems like Adam Gilchrist became after last year. Again, we don't know many details with regards to what exactly happened.
Nope.
What was really behind those disqualifications and all those things, and why has it resorted now all the way from, if you think about it, guys, all the way back from, I guess, what was it in June or May, I guess back then, when they first announced that, hey, this was going to be a thing where there's going to be 2 teams disqualified. They violated certain rules that we still don't know which rules they were. We speculate salary cap. Yeah, it was not too long. It was within, I think, a week span.
Yeah.
And if you had told me at that time that 6 months later that both of those teams would no longer be in the MLR officially, it's pretty crazy stuff, man. Hey, pretty wild.
Look. Time to move on. We got a new team coming. I'm glad that some of those boys on the Gilgronis and Giltinis will get an opportunity to go through the whole dispersal draft, get a chance to be on a new team, not just join already teams that are put together. I think that's great. Unfortunately, what they're going through now, hopefully MLR helps them out, but let's move forward. We got 12 teams this upcoming year. Great news, I guess, on that front. Sad news that 2 teams have now left the MLR.
Yeah, and if you want a reaction of kind of the initial statements about our inklings about the Giltinis and the Gilgronis leaving, we did break it down pretty in depth last episode, so you can go check that out. We talked about kind of the impact that this is having on the players. There was a statement that was released by the USA Rugby Players Association with regards to how the players are being treated and things like that. Still lots of gray area when it comes to all that stuff. In a tweet, and I'll mention it here kind of to forward that, in a tweet by the co-founder and CEO of Utah Warriors Rugby. I believe his name is Kim. Yeah, his Twitter handle is Kimball Kajar, and obviously he's been one of the big guys that has been following and helping promote the Utah Warriors and things like that. And he came out with an announcement here saying that, let me just pull it up here. The USMLR absolutely did the right thing earlier this season, and in working with the sale process of LA and Austin, despite the hard work of many in the MLR front office, board, and Gilchrist, a sale couldn't transact on time. Focus has been on and will always be on the player. So according to this CEO, according to Kimball Kajar, the CEO of the Utah Warriors, the players are on top of mind for the MLR. Now, that statement made by the Players Association last week doesn't really indicate that, but again, we'll have to see how this
we just
all
gotta hope
out.
that they're taken care of.
Exactly. And then, we'll have to see how that all plays out. But what we do know now, based on this statement, is that, in fact, indeed, the Giltinis and the Gilgronis will now not be a part of the MLR moving forward. There will be a brand new team moving in. Rumors are that it is going to be Chicago, possibly. We'll see whether or not that has any substance, but it's going to be exciting to see what city it actually is. If it is going to be Chicago, that's going to be a lot of fun. Chicago's a fun city. I think we had an episode a few weeks back, maybe a couple months back, where we kind of had an Ask TFR show question where we kind of talked about cool cities that would be a part of the MLR. You can check that out and look at our conversation about cities that could entertain an MLR team. In this case, it might be Chicago in this case, and it's not going to be LA or Austin in that case. So a nice little closure, guys, to the chapter of this whole shenanigans, a little bit at least. Obviously, the details, like I said, aren't there, but at least feels like we're moving forward here. It's going to be interesting. We mentioned it last episode too. I don't know how this dispersal draft is really going to work. There's been trades going on with that have been involving, the Giltinis and the Gilgronis. We talked about it last week. There was a salary cap trade, and there was with the move of, I believe, Luke Burden going to the San Diego Legion. They gave the Giltinis a little bit of salary cap considerations. How does that work out? Because obviously there's no Giltinis team now to use that extra salary cap space. Not quite sure. They essentially, where is that money going to be allocated to? I have no idea. So it's going to be interesting too. Last thing here, guys, got to just go over some quick roster moves. Not really sure there's as many big roster moves as there have been in past weeks, but I'm just going to name out a few. If there's any that stick out to you, you stop me when we get there. Foster DeWitt returning to New England Free Jacks, and again, some of these are going to be ones that we mentioned last week, but I just want to make sure I cover all the bases. Tyler Rowland and Adrian Wadden, they're returning to the Toronto Arrows. Penny Lasaka is returning to Old Glory DC. I know we mentioned that last week. Alex Lopetti staying with the NOLA Gold. Josh Henderson, Nate Oxberger staying with the San Diego Legion. So kind of throws a wrench into that full fly half situation on San Diego too, with Josh Henderson, I guess, staying there. Connor McLeod, he's going from the Hawke's Bay Magpies in the NPC Cup to the Utah Warriors. So nice to see again more international talent moving to the Utah Warriors. Quickly, Matt, is there a way that Vandy should be feeling about this move?
Just feel awesome, I feel awesome
every day.
Just feel up on the McLeods.
Cody McLeod, Ron McLeod, Connor McLeod. Gotcha.
There you go.
Scrum half. So you guys got your boys right now on the. And
you guys just re-signed Zion Going as well.
Maybe it sounds like the league has some sort. It seems like the league has some sort of thing about accumulating scrum halves, because there's a whole bunch of teams that have been doing that lately.
Look, I'm still a free agent, boys.
Well, hey, Utah Warriors, Niall Saunders was a big piece of the Utah Warriors at that scrum half position. Danny Christensen made a bunch of appearances there. Matt, you mentioned it. They re-signed Zion Going, and now they also obviously now have Connor McLeod, who joins that kind of scrum half roster for the Utah Warriors. So more depth there, Vandy, I guess, that you can count on. And then you got Tanila Filmon going to New England Free Jacks. He's also coming from the NPC. Tom Florence also moving from the NPC, from the Taranaki Bulls to the NOLA Gold. Chris Robshaw. This is a big one that I want to spend a little bit of time on. Matt, you probably have a little bit more familiarity with this, but Chris Robshaw is hanging up his rugby boots. He's hanging it up for his career. He is officially retiring, moving on from the San Diego Legion, and calling it a career there. A pretty formidable career for the Canadian international for Chris Robshaw.
England international.
Or England international, sorry. Apologies.
But I mean, we wish he was a Canadian international. Then maybe Canada would be something and make it to the World Cup. But no, I mean, the guy's a legend in the game. Came to San Diego and at the end of his career, and I think that's just kind of how it is. Some guys, some legends will come over, and I think we've seen in the past, and they'll end their careers here, and we just get the privilege of being able to watch them and their skill still be forces in the league when they're even on their way out the door.
Yeah, kind of a similar route to kind of the whole Andy Ellis thing, who obviously called it a career at the end of that MLR Shield Championship match. Blair Cowan, he's going to the San Diego Legion. He's moving from the Japanese League, coming from the Tokyo Black Rams, which is a pretty awesome name for a rugby club. And there's a whole bunch of then Rugby Atlanta re-signings. We mentioned, again, a few of these over in our last episode, but Johan Mumson, Matt Heaton, Jonas Petrikopoulos, Will Burke, T. Rangatira with Tokyo, Fred Henry, Ajuda, Ryan Reese, Damon Torres, and Duncan Van Schalwick. They are all returning to Rugby Atlanta.
And Martin Talapuzzi.
Is Martin Talapuzzi returning too?
Yes, he is.
There we go. So Martin Talapuzzi, who was also a key cog for that Rugby Atlanta club, also returning to Rugby Atlanta. Once again, a flurry of roster moves. Not as many that are as big outside of that Chris Robshaw signing.
Also,
so I think
Ross the Boss Brody re-signed with the Toronto Arrows.
Yes, Ross Brody re-signed with the Toronto Arrows.
Connor Keys has now signed with the New England Free Jacks. Moving from the, I believe, Atlanta over to the Free Jacks. So he's going over there. One thing I just wanted to say on roster moves is, heads up, everybody. All the Super Rugby teams have named their roster, which means that any guys that went from the MLR to the NPC Bunnings Cup and did not get selected for a roster spot for one of those Super Rugby clubs, potentially look out for them to have a good sign of them coming back to the MLR. Because obviously if they play the Super Rugby season, then they won't be playing the MLR. So they should be able to come back now after the NPC Bunnings Cup season.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Just a way to kind of read between the lines to get prepared for whatever pre-research you may be doing ahead of next year's
Lots
fantasy MLR season. Lots of sticky notes there. But all right, it's time to move on. I'll end it on this note. We did talk about last episode about how there were rumors about the commissioner of the MLR, George Killebrew, potentially not being around, maybe for much longer, considering with what's been going on and all these things. There have been rumors kind of in the social media space about that. Nothing brand new officially when it comes to that, but the MLR did wish George Killebrew a happy birthday earlier on.
He's a brand new age.
Recording that. So, I mean, it's basically saying that he's sticking around for at least a little bit.
He's a brand new
longer.
age. And hey, look, the one thing that I'll say about him is that we know that he has a great left handshake. So props to you, George Killebrew.
FDA?
No, he's got both of them. You know, Callie had to test out the left one just to make sure.
That is right.
Yeah.
That is right.
Like
We did get that confirmed. But happy birthday, I guess, to MLR Commissioner George Killebrew. More kind of insight for us to say that he is sticking around for a little bit longer. But all right, guys. Well, hey, it's time now to kind of break down the stats that Matthew has been chanting since the beginning of the episode.
Stats, graphics.
I guess the best way to kind of go forward with this is kind of give a recap before we get into the actual players.
What
we're gonna do is we're gonna go into the top 5 players of the entire rankings. We're going to reveal those first, and then we're going to go into position by position of breaking down who kind of tops those rankings in each positional category and see how they were affected by the change in stats and the reintroduction or introduction of new stat categories. So again, if you weren't listening along, you can again go back to those episodes and have a deeper listen to those conversations that we had. But we finally got our hands on guys, the stats and a little bit more in-depth stats than what we used last season for our fantasy MLR year. Last year was very score-heavy based, did a lot of try scoring meters, kicking, things like that, try-assists. Now that we've got our hands on these stats, we can now have the ability to introduce things like tackles, breakdown steals, meters gained, not just scoring meters, turnovers, and things like that. So we had conversations over the past month or so about introducing those stats. We kind of went into it, introducing them one by one, and saw the effect that each of them had independently on our fantasy rankings. And now, like I said in the tease, it's time to put it all together and see how our fantasy rankings stand after those conversations and implementing the things that we spoke about. So with all that out of the way, I'm just going to go over what we finally decided on with these rankings. So again, we went over tackles, meters gained, breakdown steals, and turnovers. Those were the big things that we wanted to introduce into our league. So when it comes to tackles, we had that conversation about maybe what we had it originally sitting at 0.5 was a little bit too overpowered. We don't want tacklers to really take over the entire game, and we don't want it to be too heavy. So what I've done is I found a happy medium, spoke with some of the league members here, and we're valuing tackles at 0.3. So kind of not too little, not 0.2, not 0.25, and not as high 0.5, but kind of a happy medium there with 0.3. Meters gained, we're going to keep it pretty vanilla, similar to what we kept it at during our last season when it came to scoring meters, 0.1. That sounds pretty standard for all of our leagues, even outside of just fantasy rugby. I mean, Vandy, you know, fantasy football goes by 0.1 typically for yards gained. We'll do that in fantasy rugby here as well. It's what we did for our scoring meters too. Breakdown steals, a little bit more weight on this one. I thought breakdown steals is something that should be rewarded in our league, so we're going to value that at 2 points for breakdown steals. And then turnovers, this is anything where the ball is given to the other team, whether that be a knockdown, a knock on, not a knockdown, knock on, a penalty turnover, losing it into contact, things like that. That's going to be minus 0.5 points for a turnover. So kind of interchanging dynamics here. We got things that are going to obviously add points, different dynamics that are going to add to the stat category. But hey, with turnovers, we're also going to have a little bit of a negative aspect too. So it's not just adding points continuously here with what we have. So you guys ready here? You guys ready for the top 5 reveal of who is at the top of our rankings?
Yeah,
let's rock and roll.
Right. Before we reveal it, do you guys want to know a little refresher of how last year's top 5 rankings were?
I would love that.
I think that matters.
I remember.
Well, last year's top 5
I don't.
rankings in terms of fantasy players. Bodine Waka was number 1 at 126 fantasy points. Ed Fidow, 117. Joe Peterson, 104. AJ Alatimu, 97.5. And then William Talatana at 89.7. And again, this was off of a heavy try-scoring format here. A lot of kickers were up in that top 5. Let's see now whether or not that top 5 stays the same or relatively same. Do you see some familiar names? And we got Bill Meeks, Ed Fidow, JP Duplessis, LaRue Milan, and Will Leonard. And interesting enough, for those of you watching on our YouTube channel who see the stats there on our screen, 4 of the 5 of them are centers.
What the heck's up with this?
3 making the top 5 there with Ed Fidow. Guys, initial kind of reaction to this top 5 before I start breaking down the actual numbers.
I don't know how I feel. I don't know how I'm feeling about this. Feels like there's a lot of centers in that top 5, and I thought there would be at least a back row or something, or
I thought there'd
some
be a back
forward,
row there too.
at least some forward in there. I mean, hey, I'm interested to see what exactly is. It's probably the fact that 1, they get the ball a lot. 2, they tackle a lot, and 3, they're probably involved in the breakdown sometimes as well. So I mean, hey, you expect it from the center, but you also kind of want to see the forward pack. Some forwards have some representative in that top 5.
Now, Ryan, out of the top, I don't know if you have these numbers on hand. Out of like the top, let's say 20, how many of those would be centers?
Well, we'll get into that because we got the next graphic coming up here. We'll show up the top 15 here because I did want to do that. I wanted to see kind of how how we could introduce some of those positions into that top 10, into that top 15, and even into that top 5. And I was playing with these values earlier on today, guys, and listening back to our discussion about what we thought were valued. And even when I was lowering the tackle amount, or even when I was increasing the tackle amount and things like that, it really wasn't allowing forward players to necessarily break this top 5 number. And I think, Matt, you're starting on a good point there. I think you do have a good feeling that centers are just, they really do it a little bit of everything. They're at the breakdown so they can get breakdown steals. They're making tackles at the center of the field because they're often where the point of contacts are going to be. They have a lot of meters gained because they handle the ball a lot. They also have the ability to break lines often. You look at Bill Meeks, you look at JP Duplessis, we look at LaRue Milan, we look at Will Leonard. Those are all guys that we remember through the entirety of the 2022 season of having those big time plays, of being able to break through that line and collecting a big chunk of meterage during the match.
Well, look at that beast, Will Leonard, with 14 breakdown steals at the center.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy. So let's break it down a little bit further here. I'll start off with Bill Meeks here. He finishes off at the top of our rankings, 244.5 total fantasy points. He was the player with the most meters gained in the entire season with 1,552. That is out of all the players in fantasy MLR. He led all of them. And he was also at the center position, the 32nd best tackler, making a total of 166 tackles in the entirety of this 2022 year. With the changing of those stats, introducing tackles, introducing breakdown steals, and introducing meters gained, Bill Meeks goes up 53 spots in the ranking. So he was sitting at 54 in our previous kind of scoring format, and now with this new format, he jumps up 53 spots. That's kind of just, does that surprise you at all?
I'm surprised to see him at the top, frankly. There are so many guys that I expected to see above Bill Meeks. Yes, he had the most meters gained, but at the end of the day, meters gained is really 0.1 points for us, right? Like,
right.
Yeah. What I got it. Like, what else is there? I mean, yes, he made 166 tackles, but LaRue Milan, you're looking right there. He's made 172 tackles, right? It's interesting to me because I just did not expect Bill Meeks to be up at the top, and it's kind of making me wonder maybe we should have tackles 0.5 and we'd see some more forwards up there.
Yeah. And again, like I said, though, even with having a 0.5, breaking the top 5 is hard, I think, because with these guys that you have here, these guys are really guys that did everything. Like I said, in addition to the stats that are listed on your screen there, they were also scoring tries and they were also getting points. So I think when you put that all together, for me, at least, it's not surprising that the center position gets the biggest boost here, clearly in this top 5, at least.
Well, it's almost like it was like a transition. It was like kickers. Basically, your kicker was like your quarterback last year. Now it makes sense if a center seems to be doing the most on the field, like as a quarterback would be. It makes sense that they're all ranked as high as they are.
That's fair enough.
Now, if you even look like 3rd to 5th, you're talking 5 points difference.
Yeah,
like that's nothing. Though, you know, that could be interchangeable. Just real quick, what's the difference between 5 and 10? And just
we're gonna get there, Vandy. You're excited, man.
Vandy,
we're moving on.
Quick, you're getting ahead of the schedule.
But
I just mean it's talking points.
We'll get to it.
Ahead of the schedule.
We'll get to it real quick here. But let me just break down here again. We're not surprised necessarily about Ed Fidow. He again 12 tries in the 2020 year, first in the entire MLR. Add to that, we remember a bunch of those big time break free line breaks. Getting through that amalgamated to that 1,432 meters gained. And then when you break down some of these lower centers, Vandy, like you mentioned, that aren't really separated by that many points, JP Duplessis, Leroux Milan, Will Leonard, again, a lot of these guys being benefactors of that, you know, they have a lot of meters gained. We talked about the 2nd most meters gained for JP Duplessis, 5th most meter gain for Leroux Milan, and 8th most meters gained for Will Leonard. So obviously when you have that there, that's a whole bunch of points that you're adding. And again, lots of tackles there for both Leroux Milan and JP Duplessis. And then a lot of breakdown steals for Will Leonard, 10th overall at the center position with 14. That's a whole bunch of breakdown steals there. And then respectively, those addition of stats, 123 ranking increase for JP Duplessis, 17 spot increase for Leroux Milan, and then 46 spot increase for Will Leonard. So that's your top 5: Bill Meeks, Ed Fidow, JP Duplessis, Leroux Milan, Will Leonard. And again, the big takeaway there is that 4 of the 5 there are centers, which is definitely something that wasn't last year. The center position in our season last year really didn't have a lot of value. It looks like with this season, it might have a whole lot more value at that center position. And what Vandy's been asking for, let's give it to him here. We got the 6 to 15 ranking now. So this is what you've been waiting for. You're starting to now see a little bit more of those back row position players. You're seeing Reichert Hadding at that 6th spot. You're seeing Lance Williams at that 14 spot, and you're seeing Ronan Foley at that 15 spot. So I'll take you through the top 15 here. Reichert Hadding at 6, Joe Peterson at 7, Faasu Fuatai at 8, Renata Roberts-Tanana at 9, Duncan Matthews at 10, Mark O'Keefe at 11, Penny Lasaka at 12, AJ Alatimu at 13, Lance Williams at 14, and Ronan Foley at 15.
This is wild. Top 15, and we haven't seen any Waka Flocka flaming. This is crazy.
Right?
This is crazy.
I was just about to mention that, is that you haven't even seen the guy that essentially was the star, and he was the MVP of the 2022 MLR season. Hands down, I think everyone agreed that he was the guy that was having the most impact on the field. And we talked about kind of reflecting that in fantasy rugby with this change in kind of stats. We may not be getting that, at least with the MVP.
Yeah, I mean, look, like this, the way these stats are built is it favors the all-rounded players. You do everything. You're really good at one thing and you're mediocre at some of the other things. You're going to get a lot of fantasy points. And you know what? Like, it's how it should be. You know what I mean? Like, if you're scoring tries, sure, awesome. You're an impact. Yes, you're the MVP of the league. But just because you're absolutely electric on offense, but provide not that much stats on defense, and hey, you know, it is what it is. You need to be an all-rounded player to do well in fantasy. I mean, moving across it to another guy who was an absolute stud last year, Reichert Hadding. I mean, talk about being tough to break that top 5. Like even PEDs can't even help you break that top 5. Right?
So, it's interesting enough. Again, I think that it's difficult to kind of bump up a forward into that top 5. I try to play around with it. It's really tough without.
He tried his best.
Super saturating, I guess, or overpowering what that tackle stat actually is. Because again, I think that was what was really helpful about those previous episodes about breaking things down, is having that kind of individual, independent look at each of those stats. I think on its own, we saw that, hey, tackles were really overpowered. But like you mentioned, we had those conversations before too. Maybe there's counteracting things here. Maybe we are able to punch up stats or push up stats to 0.5, maybe even 0.75, because there's other things that kind of counterbalance that, like turnovers and things like that. Matt, what are you celebrating at?
Nothing. I was just cheering for Vandy's fandom. He's got fans going on in the background. I wish I had the same, Hey, Vandy, look at Big Joe getting knocked out of the top 5.
Yeah,
what the heck is up with that, eh?
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah,
Especially when you go back to fullback. He didn't really get a lot of meters, didn't get a lot of...
So interesting enough, to answer your question, Vandy, you look at that 15 spot and you got 187.7 points given by Ronan Foley. We go back to the top 5 and we got 244.5 for Bill Meek. So there's about a 60-point difference there between your top overall guy and your 15th overall guy, which is not terrible.
No, it follows pretty much the trend.
Yeah, and I think what I like is that I'm seeing a gradient of kind of points going down here. It's not, I think often with our scoring system last year, we'd have kind of these big chunks where we'd have guys that are at the top that have, 100 plus points, and then there'd be guys that have, 50 points, that are coming in right after, just because of the volatility of try scoring.
Look how many stats look how many points these guys have up at the top. I mean, we're hitting over 200, that is, that's unreal. I mean, look at how many points. What was the top points last year, Ryan?
I believe Bodie Waka got 123 points around.
Yeah, and he was essentially. And who was the next guy? Because Bodie Waka was kind of
Fido, I think.
Yeah,
and after Ed
Fido. So Bodie Waka had 126 points. Ed Fido had 117.
And still, you're like half.
But to Vandy's points, it drops off quickly. Joe Peters at 104, AJ Alatimo at 98, William Tyler Tina at 90. It starts to fall off pretty rapidly. Where here you're not seeing that.
Yeah, no, this is. I think this is cool to see, because it's just the fact that we have almost doubled the amount of points.
Yeah,
that are up for grabs with some of these players. It's just great to see.
A lot more balanced, right? That's exactly what you're looking for. You want your elites, but you don't want to skew it.
Right. And I'm loving the fact that I'm not seeing a whole bunch of fly half kickers in here, like what we saw at our rankings last year, where really our top 10 was really, I think if I'm looking at it now, out of our top 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we had 7 kickers. 7 out of 10 of our people in our top 10 were kickers. Right, 3 out of the top, or 4 out of the top 5 were kickers. Right, in our if we go back to the top 5 rankings, none are kickers. You know what I mean? So talk about a shift in focus in terms of where you're getting your points from. And then when you look at the top 15, we only have 2 kickers in there with AJ Alatimu and Joe Peterson. So I do like the idea of that. Now that you guys,
you actually you got 4 centers in the top 5, but you only got 6 in the top 15.
Mm-hmm.
So
hey, that means that there's a fault. That means hey, if you get hands on one of those top centers.
Well, the thing was, like last year, right? Kicker is such an important position, but it was such a minimal position that now if center's kind of your meat and potatoes, there's a lot of centers.
Yeah.
Or more of than kickers. Way more of.
It's
you don't want people falling into that, one injury can ruin a season type mindset.
Right.
This is true. There's 2 centers in a team.
Right. And I mean, now that you see the top 15, your initial guys, it's kind of funny. Your initial guys' reaction to that top 5 was a little bit skeptical, seeing 4 centers up there. Now, Vandy, you mentioned 6 in the top 15. You're seeing a little bit more back rows. You're seeing fly halves. You're seeing back threes. Yep. Guys, a little bit more comfortable with this scoring format now that you see the top 15?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exactly what you want.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would still love to see a bit more forwards representing even in the top 15. I know maybe the top 5's hard to crack. But even more forward represented in the top 15. But, the players that I'm seeing here are the players that you would think deserve to be in this top 15. all of these guys were studs all year round, and that's what that's what we love to see. We don't need to have the guys that are scoring 4 tries but really aren't making a contribution to the rest of the game.
These are names when you watch the game you're going to hear
exactly,
them, and you're going to hear them a lot. Those are all names you're going to hear constantly.
And hey, that means that we're on somewhat of a right track here. So I think the big thing here, the big shocker is that, yes, Matt, you mentioned it, Bodine Walker is not in this top.
That is crazy, though.
Where the heck is this guy?
I believe in our rankings, which we'll get to, he's sitting at 23rd overall in all the positions. So
he's lost.
Still one of the top guys that you'll target in your fantasy ranking, but at least when going into last season, but not necessarily with this format. Is he going to be someone that's going to be as heavily impactful, or I should say literally OP? Like the guy that you had Bodine Walker last season, he was broken, just the amount of points that he was scoring. But now that you're introducing tackles, breakdown steals, things that he may not be as good at. He was a little bit lower in the tackle column. He was a little bit lower in some of those other areas, breakdown steals and things like that. A guy that handles the ball a lot, gets a lot of turnovers too. Kind of nerves him a little bit.
But outside of Bodine Walker, a lot of these names you don't see them. I guess AJ Altimu dropped 9 spots, but they're not dropping an insane amount. Joe dropped 4. Roberts Tanana dropped 1.
It's more guys going up.
Exactly. You're not seeing all these top dogs now dropping 20 spots, but now you're seeing guys who are, like I was saying, very relevant to the game. You're going to hear them a lot, are now up in your top 15.
Right. And I think that's a good thing too, right? Like we talked about to start the show with our Ask TFR show question about more points is a good thing for fantasy. And if everyone's getting boosted up in the rankings, everyone's moving up, everyone's getting more points, that's a good thing to see. So I do think we're on somewhat of a right track here. I like this top 15. I think we're onto something here. Hey, to your point, Matt, to get more back rows into that top 5, let's just get some of these back rows. Maybe get Mike Smith to hit a little bit more.
Who knows? Maybe it'll change. It'll change my mind once we see the top 5 for each position, because then I'll know how far off they are.
Yep. Exactly. All right. Well, top five overall players there, top 15 overall players there broken down. Let's now start slowly getting into the positions here, because I think that's what really matters. That's what fantasy managers are looking for, seeing where they can get the advantage at certain positions, because it's all relative, right? We know that back 3 players are going to get a lot of points. We know that in this case, with this format, centers are going to get a lot of points. But how do you take advantage at maybe a position that doesn't get as many points, like the front row, comparing to other front row players? So let's get into it. Front row top 5 with our new additions of stats. We got Dean Muir, James Malcolm, Marco Jan von Rensburg at 3, Dylan Fawcett at 4, Andrew Quattrin at 5. So a little bit of a shakeup there for our top 5 front row positions. Guys, if you want to know the front row, top 5 front row with our stats last year: Dean Muir, Marco Jan von Rensburg, Hugh Roach, Alex Mon, Peter Malcolm. So a little bit of a change there.
To me, that makes, like, yes, Hugh Roach scored tries, but he was not the, he wasn't the stud. Like, he wasn't the third best hooker in the league, right? Like, he wasn't the third best front row in the league. And you look at this list here, and this to me looks like the exact way that I would look at all the hookers. I mean, they're all hookers. They're all hookers. I don't think that's a surprise to us, first of all. But when you look at this list, I look at that and I say, that is in order the top 5 hookers in this league.
Yeah, I'd agree.
That's what I see. And I think that's great. That's just, it just means that our stats and the way that we are statting out this in this listing is awesome.
And Dean Muir was an animal. So being 20 points ahead of Quattrin, who also being an animal, just Dean Muir got more tries, right? 18 tries to
10 tries. 10 tries to, I think, Andrew Quattrin. The font's kind of weird. 10 tries to, I think Quattrin got, I can pull it up here. I think I want to say he got like 2 tries this season.
So that's what I mean. Like, Muir still was
3 tries.
Kind of the front row that, first year in the league, boom, you said front row, I think Dean Muir. You know what I mean? So seeing him still at the top is good.
Yeah, and back to your point,
Randy, massive discrepancy.
I mean, back to your point, like, the discrepancy is small. And also, like, we're seeing these guys that deserve to go up 100 spots.
Yeah, for
go
sure.
Go up 100 spots. And the guys that don't deserve to go down a lot are not going down a lot. Dean Muir is not losing his rankings by, adding all these extra stats. But what we're doing is allowing James Malcolm and Andrew Quattrin to be able to be recognized by fantasy points, their actual worth on the field. And again, same with Jans, Vons, Mons, Gons, Rensburg, right? He only went down 29 points in comparison to the 186 that James Malcolm went up. I think this is seeing this front row has really kind of made me think, hey, we're on to something. We're up to something here.
No, I completely agree. And again, to kind of add to that, Matt, about, the decreasing in fantasy ranking spots based off these stat changes, is that the guys that are kind of going down, and to your point, Matt, by not that much. I mean, 30 ranking spots is not terribly a lot in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I think there were a total of 590 players that were in total in the rankings.
Almost in a way, for me, I think what this is doing is clustering the top 5 in each position. It's like bringing them all together into what we think is the top 5 hookers in the league, top 5 centers in the league, top 5 back rows in the league, and bringing them together into a spot like, hey, I know that this position, if I get one of the top 5s, I'm going to get X amount of points. Right, and you can say that like it's pretty close between 141 to 121. Like that's only 20 points, but with the draft capital that you gain by drafting Quattrin maybe later on and picking up a better center earlier on, that 20 points can make up for itself. And I think this is awesome. Like we're not seeing the huge discrepancy between Quattrin, who isn't the worst hooker in the league for sure, and Dean Muir.
And again, what I was saying is that the guys that are going down, like Dean Muir and Marco Jan van Rensburg, slightly in the ranking, is largely due to because their fantasy point total was somewhat inflated due to the increased number of tries that they got. So you look at Jan van Rensburg, he scored 9 tries on the season, third positionally. You look at Dean Muir, 10 tries on the season, the top at that front row position. Those guys were inflated because those were points that were already kind of baked into their fantasy point total. But then you got, like to Matt's point, James Malcolm, who's kind of supplementing that with those meters gained. He made 229 tackles this past season, first at that front row position. So he should be rewarded for that. Your number one tackler at that front row position should be in your top 5. And now we're I guess, getting that baked into our fantasy ranking here, seeing that James Malcolm is up there. So and guys like Andrew Quattrin too, Dylan Fawcett, like you see there, like that's what it is.
Like even here, like Jans van Rensburg, 9 try meters, and that's third in that position. You know what I mean? That
and sorry, there's a little bit of a typo there. That should just say 9 tries. That should just say tries. That's not just the meters gained.
We still love the graphic. We still love the graphic.
I'm like,
we still love the graphic.
Yeah. No, but nine tries. Yeah, he got 9 tries last season. So, it's good to see with the front row position. Again, Dean Muir, number 1, 2, James Malcolm, Marco Jan van Rensburg, number 3, Dylan Fawcett, 4, Andrew Quattrin, number 5. And again, you can see all the detailed stats. If you're listening on our podcast, you'll be able to, if you check out the YouTube video, we got all the detailed stats and the fantasy metrics there on our screen there. Let's move over to the second row now and continue seeing whether or not this is something that stays in theme here with these changed stats, with kind of the merging of these rankings of not having as high kind of outliers with these positions. Let's look at the second row. Number 1, Johan Mumsen. Number 2, Stan South. Number 3, Yuri Van Vuren. Number 4, Ben Mitchell. Number 5, Josh Larson. So again, second row was a position that we kind of predicted would benefit most from the addition of these stats. We saw it when we were putting in the additional stats, and we're seeing it here with the amount of ranking spots that all of these second row positions increase in the top 5 here. Guys, you see this? What's your kind of initial reaction to seeing the second row?
You know what I said at the start of the show?
Yeah.
You know what I said at the start of the show when I said that I would be so much better in the Fantasy Rucker League with these stats?
Yeah.
3 of those guys on my squad right there. 3 of those guys all in the top 5. Come on now. Let's go. And I had Dylan Fawcett and James Malcolm from the last one. Come on.
You did.
But, what you said, Ryan, is clear. Like, look at how many spots these guys are moving up, and deservingly so. Again, we're seeing it again. Like, we're seeing exactly who we think should be in the top 5. in the top 5. Momsen, a guy who is less fantasy relevant, Yuri Van Uren, Ben Mitchell, just because I had them, I know that they were less fantasy relevant sometimes. But look, these guys are the top 5, I think, not just fantasy wise, but again, just like the front rows, they're among the top 5 second rows in the MLR. And we're seeing that reflected. This is what we're striving for. This is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's all relative, like what I said at the start, right? You look at this second row position, right? You look at Johan Mumsen, who had the most meters gained at 724 meters on the 2022 season at that second row position. He had 4 tries at the second row position, first positionally, and he only was able to rack up 150.7 total fantasy points. I mean, you compare it to what, some of the guys looking at our top 15 here, they're breaking 200 points, right? So obviously, there is still not a whole bunch of points value being drawn out from this second row position, but at least now we're making it relevant. Value. They're not completely invaluable. You're not just randomly throwing someone in your lineup and being, all right, I hope he scores 2 points because he stays on for 80 minutes. And
it's all relevant though.
Well, because sometimes, like even last year, there were multiple weeks when people sat a second row instead of dropping somebody to fill it. It was basically, if you had to waiver a second row, what was the point?
Right. But exactly. Now if you have a guy like Johan Mumsen who's going to be rewarded for the meters that he runs and the try scoring ability that he has, you're going to have a huge advantage of playing Johan Mumsen at your lineup as opposed to having maybe a different second row that might be Taylor, that might be lower in the rankings.
I would say though, with the second row, it seems like there's a bit more disparity between first and fifth. It looks like, we're dropping down. It looks like 50 points there.
But Ryan touched on, to me, it makes sense why there is. You're talking the first of that position, and then Larson, he had the most tackles, sure, but how many? He was 11th in meters gained, and I don't even know how many guys he got, but if you're 11, you know what I mean? So it makes sense.
Sure.
And to Matt's point, I think, and you may like it, you may not like it, and it would be interesting to see. Maybe we can get a little bit of reaction from our current league members here. Message us in the Discord channel. Let us know in the comments down below what you guys think of this. But it would be interesting to kind of hear from them what they think of, I guess, those breakdowns of being that overall player, like you mentioned, Matt. Like if you're an overall guy that's able to carry the ball, you touch the ball a lot, you gain a lot of meters gained, you get a lot of tackles, you score a try occasionally here and there. You don't need to be the 12 try scorer like Ed Fido. You just got to pop in a couple here and there. You can be high in the rankings for being good or above average in a whole bunch of stats rather than just being hyper explosive at one singular stat, which is what I felt like what was last year. I feel like if you're just hyper explosive at tries, you're going to dominate the fantasy rankings. If you're hyper explosive at kicking, you're going to dominate the fantasy rankings because that's where most of the points came from. In this essence, there's not one place that you can get all the points.
And hey, the other thing with the disparity between first and fifth is it allows, it provides draft strategy. Right? Like,
sure.
For me, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, dang, I better get a second, having a Johan Mumsen or a Stan South or a Yuri Van Uren, that's an additional 20 points to 60 points on top of number 5. So maybe I spend a higher draft capital on Johan Mumsen and settle for a center that maybe gets, 10 or 15 points less than the top guy, or a hooker that gets 5 or 6 points less than the top guy. Like, Now we're looking at draft strategy, and we kind of did that last year, and I kind of said, oh, what position is going to drop off really quick in terms of tries scored? But this year, it's like, hey, like, it's not just tries that we're looking at. We're looking at so much more, like you said, Ryan, that now the draft strategy can actually be taking educated guesses.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, for our listeners, Johan Mumsen moving 40 spots in our rankings up. Stan South moving 122 spots up in our rankings. Yuri Van Vuren moving 109 spots up in our rankings. And all these three guys are guys that ranked top 4 in categories that we have added. So Johan Mumsen ranking first in meters gained. boosts him up to 40 spots. Stan South is 3rd in tackles, 4th in breakdown steals. He moves up 122 spots. Yuri Van Vuren, 4th in breakdown steals at his position, 2nd in meters gained at that second row position. He goes up 109 ranking. So these are guys that are taking advantage of these categories that we're introducing into the world of fantasy sports, and that second row position clearly is getting a huge benefit from that. All 5 guys bumping a whole bunch in those rankings.
Now I'm excited to see the back row.
Let's move on to the back row position now. We had kind of a little bit of iffiness when we were breaking down these stats in terms of how these newly introduced stats are going to affect this position. Let's take a look at the top 5. They all go up. Reichert Hadding, Lance Williams, Ronan Foley, Devin Short, Moni Tonguiwaha. There we go. Finally, third time's a charm. There's your top 5 for back row rankings.
What if I told you it was Tonga Uhia?
Is that what it is? That's probably what it is. Tonga Uhia. That sounds a lot better.
I like yours
the
more,
people,
right?
the people know that I have a terrible time of pronouncing these names. So you correct me if I'm wrong. But again, top 5 rankings that you see there if you're watching on the YouTube channel. Reichert Hadding 1, Lance Williams 2, Ronan Foley 3, Devin Short 4, Tessimoni Tongowiha number 5 there for your rankings. Guys, initial thoughts with this.
I think the best takeaway is Reichert Hadding goes up 1 spot. And then the second place of that position moves up 16. The third moves up 78. Talk about adding depth to a position that was literally strong held by Reichert Hadding. He was dominant and nothing close to what he was.
I was going to say, and hey, representatively dominant though. Like this guy was the top back row in the league with tries. He did offensively, did everything, and he had his part on defense, and it's clear exactly. So that's why 100%. But that's why I'm looking at the disparity. I'm saying, hey, of course, there's disparity.
To be 50 points.
This guy was an absolute threat in the back row and was also popping pills. Like what are you gonna do against that, right? Like, so look, like that's expected.
Lance Williams on the juice, baby.
Lance. But no, do you know what I'm surprised I'm not seeing? A Lucas Rumble.
Yeah,
that's what I'm surprised I'm not seeing, because Mike Smith. But hey, that's what happens when you take down the tackling a little bit, right? Like, yes, it maybe diminishes tackling a little bit, but it stops guys who are just like for tries, like stops guys that are just there for tackles from dominating the league. You have to be all rounded this way. You have to do everything. Ronan Foley on the Arrows did more of everything than Lucas Rumble, and that's why he's in the top 5.
Yeah, and at top 5 for our fantasy rankings last year, Reichert Hadding still number 1. Obviously, a large part of that is the 10 tries that he scored last season, which led all back row positions at that try scoring number. Following up with Lance Williams, which stays the same, but the 3, 4, 5 is different. Slade McDowell is actually here at number 3, Hanko Germicius at number 4, and Devin Short at number 5 there. So Devin Short gets bumped down a little bit there. But I think to your point, Matt, you look at the ranking spot changes, and Vandy noticed it at the start. It's just bunching everyone back up together. You know what I mean? The outliers are not so out there anymore. We're just kind of getting everyone back in. You're still getting an advantage for having Reichert Hadding. You're still getting that bonus for having a guy that is able to do all the things that he can do on the pitch. But you're not terribly losing out because, Ronan Foley, Lance Williams, Devin Short, Tessimoni Tongowiha is still a good player, and they should be rewarded for that. And being only, I guess, around 30, 40 points off from what is considered the best of the best in Reichert Hadding last season is something that's reassuring to see. So
hey, you're not going to draft Reichert Hadding next season anyway, so you're good.
I drafted Lance Williams, baby.
Fair enough. And then just looking down there, a lot of these guys at that back row position, the reason why they're moving up is because of the meters gained that they were able to get. You're looking at Ronan Foley, who 1,055 meters, 3rd at that back row position, 903 meters for Devin Short, 5th at his position, 929 meters for Tessimoni Tongowiha at that 4th in the back row position there. So kind of boosting them up a little bit. But again, it is is adding value to a position that I felt like last season, back row, if they weren't scoring a try, if you didn't have Reichert
if you weren't Reichert Hadding, you didn't get in.
You really weren't looking at that position to really help you at all on a week-to-week basis. So it is cool to see that. All right, now time to move on to Vandy's favorite position, the one that he was looking for basically all last season. We'll see whether or not these stats help him out a little bit. Hey, maybe. Do you think Holden Youngert is in this top 5?
150 points for sitting on the bench, baby.
Genius.
Yeah, 155 points for those sweet chops that he rocks every week. But let's take a look at the scrum half position. For you guys listening,
I wanted him to
we got
be there too.
Number 1, Harrison Goddard. Number 2, Danny Tusitala. Number 3, JP Smith. Number 4, John Poland. Number 5, Jason Higgins. And again, what I think is the biggest thing that you'll notice here is that oppositely to what the second row position did, all the scrum half positions are taking a pretty big hit here in the rankings. None of them moving up, all of them decreasing in the spots that they had compared to last year's fantasy format.
Look, we talk about doing everything, right? From my memory of being a scrum half, I would pass, I would kick, I would run a little, but you're not going to catch me making a tackle. You're not going to catch me, I don't know, getting in a breakdown to try and steal the ball. That's just, I'm 5'7". What am I going to do against these big breaks? What am I going to do? So, no, it makes sense. And remember, these guys are handling the ball the most. These guys, they throw a bad pass. They're passing, every breakdown essentially. So the chances for them for potentially having a turnover is a lot higher. So I'm not surprised. I kind of dig it.
And Vanny, why don't you go ahead?
Tusi, you look at like Tusitaya, who's first positioning for meters gained at 571. Reichert Hadding had damn near double that, right?
Yeah.
So it makes sense, guys like that are dropping because, well, not him specifically, but JP Smith, Poland, Goddard, all kickers, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the emphasis here is the lower kickers, lower tries, and I think we're getting nothing but success in these parameters.
Yeah. And I think what's something to note here as well, just look at the point drop off between the number 3 after JP Smith as opposed to John Poland. Like really, this should be a top 3 rather than a top 5.
I mean, but this is one of the positions,
Smith,
right?
125 points total. And then you look at John Poland, 103.6, right? Yeah. That's a 20-point drop off, which is a pretty steep decrease there after that 3 position. So I think what I'm learning here as we're going through these positions, you're kind of checking off your checkbox here about what positions are in high demand, what positions are producing. There's a lot of people in that category that can score a lot of points, and what positions really don't have that concentration or that plethora amount of players that are in that category that can score you points. Second row is appearing like that to me, and it does look like scrum half is going to be that position.
You're gonna have to spend a little bit more draft capital to make sure that you get one of these 3 guys, because if you don't, you're dropping off, you're losing around 20, 30 points. If you don't get one of these top 5 guys, you're dropping off 30, 40 points from the top guys. And look, you're either going to have to sacrifice somewhere to make sure you get the best in multiple other positions, or you make sure you get the guys here to make sure that you can get a quality scrum half, a quality second row.
And it kind of sets it up easy because I know Harrison Goddard obviously moved on from the MLR. He's getting time overseas, I believe, with the Waratahs, right? New South Wales he signed with, I believe. So you really bump up Danny Tusitala and JP Smith here as your really only outliers. And you look at Danny Tusitala, the thing that makes him the outlier, first in the position at meters gained, 571. Yes, to Vandy's point, you're not getting the same amount of meters that Reichert Hadding is getting. Nowhere near what Bill Meeks was getting, almost a third of what Bill Meeks was getting. But having that advantage of 571 meters at the scrum half position as opposed to compared to other scrum halves is a big bonus. And you look at JP Smith racking up 152 tackles first at his position. I'm pretty sure the next one, the next best person there didn't break. I mean, you look at Harrison Goddard was 119 tackles at third place. So huge advantage having JP Smith, who's apparently very, very physical.
Before we go to fly-offs, I'm just going to make a quick prediction that I'm actually going to write down and tattoo on my leg is that Luke Campbell on NOLA Gold, newly signed, is going to be at the top of this list. No matter what stats we use or what stats we get, he's going to be at the top of this list at the end of next season.
All right, book it. Luke Campbell, number 1 scrum half for the 2023
just write that
fantasy
down here.
season. Exactly. Gotta put a little bet on that. But yeah,
Smoke
Matt, you
screen.
said it.
Brackets.
Let's
It's a trap.
yeah, it's a trap. Exactly. Let's move on here to the fly half position, guys. Interesting enough, you were finally seeing the name that we've been waiting to see, and we look at the top 5 here. AJ Alatimu at number 1, number 2 Bodine Waka, number 3 Caleb McElhinney, number 4 David Coates, and number 5
This is
Sam
wild.
Malcolm. All of them are kickers.
Look
Guys,
at the points.
Initial reaction.
Look at the points that they have.
Only kicked like half the season too.
Yeah. But hey, he played fullback and that he ran. That guy just ran. But look at the points here. This isn't even close to like the top points that we've seen so far.
No.
Right? Like this is not even, and we're still getting to the centers. Like they're gonna have the top points, but like 170, 100. Like is scrum half, fly half almost the next like lowest scoring positions? Does that make sense? I think so. I think a fly half wouldn't want to get into a breakdown just as much as I don't want to get into a breakdown. You know, a fly half doesn't want to make a tackle just as much as I don't want to make a tackle.
So I mean, it all depends. A large portion of these points are coming from the boot. You're looking at AJ Alatimu.
For sure.
First in penalties, he hit 30 of 35 penalties in 2022, 37 of 49 conversions, second highest in 2022, and he still decreases 12 spots. And then you look at Bodine Waka, he scored 6 tries, first at the position, and he also did a really good job kicking. Surprisingly enough, Alatimu was able to lock up that first spot and crack that top 15 that we showed not too long ago without scoring any tries on the season. He didn't score one single try last season, and he was still in the top 15 and at that number 1 spot. That just goes to show you his kicking ability. He also racked up 15 try assists. That was the most at that fly half position. And then obviously you look there on the screen, 135 tackles, second at the fly half position is also a pretty big bonus as well. Looking at last year, for the top 5 rankings with our last year's stats, Bodine Waka was number 1 by far. AJ Alatimu was 2, and then you got Sam Malcolm, Rohan Saifaloy, which is not here in our top 5, and then David Coates, who is there. So you're reintroducing Caleb McElhinney in there into that lineup instead of Rohan Saifaloy, essentially. But yeah, pretty cool stuff. I mean, I think what's nice here is that we're really not impacting the fly half position that much at a position that was so overly powered in our last season. And we're allowing all the other positions to catch up. It's not surpassing the fly half position. Like you're looking here, like Alatimu, obviously the outlier, still scoring 180 points. But look at Sam Malcolm, right? I wouldn't necessarily say he's top 5 fly half, but again, we only have 8 teams in our league. You know what I mean? Like a top 5 fly half is not essentially the best of the best in our fantasy league. You look at him, he's kind of, I guess, in the middle of the pack when it comes to starting 5 halves out of 150 points. We go back to our front row. I mean, that's what our top front rows are getting, 150 points. You look at our second rows, that's around what they're getting, 150 points. So we're kind of now allowing, you look at back row, the even higher than what fly halves were getting, and scrum halves were even lower there. We're just kind of pushing, like Matt said, to kind of beat that same theme and that same point home, is that we're just pushing all those points together, all of the spread of all these stats and all these points of different players at different positions is not as widespread. It's getting a little bit tighter here. So we can clearly see that at the fly half position.
Now things are about to get exciting.
Yeah, things are about to get exciting. And you can obviously predict that because we had 4 centers in our top 5 to open up the show.
We've already seen them. We don't even need to talk about them.
We've already seen them. There's just going to be one more that's in there. But yeah, Bill Meeks, number 1, which we saw. JP Duplessis, which we saw, number 2. Number 3, LaRue Milan. Number 4, Will Leonard. All 4 of those guys we saw, and now we are introducing Fa'a Asui Fuatai in that top 5 as well. All of them moving up spots. Honestly, they're not moving up as significantly up in the rankings, at least the number of spots, as I thought they would be. 50 spots is still a lot, but I thought it would have been a much bigger boost than that. But nonetheless, a center, a position that obviously does a lot of the things that we introduced into these new fantasy rankings and fantasy stats, they're taking advantage of it as being, I guess, now the top scoring position in our fantasy format.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just amazed by how many points these guys have. I mean, the fact I did not expect centers to be the highest scoring position by, scoring this many points.
Right.
Especially the top 4 of those centers to look like that. That just seems crazy to me. But hey, I think we got it right. Bill Meeks, the most meters gained. I think he was on the first. Yeah, he was on the first 15. I believe, to end the season. And he was voted the best back of the year.
I believe so.
Back of the year. So hey, it makes sense that this guy is above head and shoulders above all, right? Yeah. I don't think we need to get into it too much, but yeah, I think it's crazy to see how high these guys are scoring. But when you think about it and the way our stats work, they really do everything, and in different ways.
Based off the metrics, it doesn't seem to fall out of line. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
if we're going to refer to them as a quarterback, well, hell, look at football. You can't judge what a quarterback gets relative to a wide receiver. Yeah. You know what I mean? As long as your position's relative, and Bill Meeks is top dog, you always want to have a top dog.
I think for me, center in specific, these guys are able to get points in so many different ways just because of the position that they are in the field. So it's how do you want your center to get you points? What do you feel more safer with game by game for a center to get you points? Bill Meeks, he's going to get it by the stats here. It looks like he's going to get it by meters gained, and he's going to do breakdown steals. How much can you rely on that in a given game versus, LaRue Milan getting meters gained and tackling? I can trust tackling more because that's on me. This is something that I got to do. I got to tackle. I got to gain meters. But breakdown steals, what if the other team that they're playing happens to be really good at breakdown, happens to be really good at securing the ball and being able to move the ball quickly? I think it just makes a whole, adding these stats, especially with the center position, that they can all do everything, kind of just makes it almost like two people can value the same player different. Because
and I think too, right, the way that the center position is going to get points is going to be completely different than how, let's say, a back 3 position is going to get points, right? We're going to get into the back 3 in just a sec here, and you're going to see that a lot of the points are also pretty high. But I think it's a great example is that a center position, because what you're saying, Matt, is going to be getting a larger part of their points through meters gained, through tackles, things that happen consistently throughout a game. Right. You're going to get more consistent play from your center position, right? When you put a guy in, when you put in Bill Meeks in, when you put in JP Duplessis in, he's going to have games where obviously he breaks off for, but I think a lot of what you're buying when you're drafting Bill Meeks, or what you're buying into when you're drafting a high level center, is that you're going to consistently get 10 points every single week, 10 to 15 points every single week, with a few big time weeks when they score tries sprinkled in there every week, as opposed to a back 3 position, which we'll see here shortly, where you may get 30 points one week and then 0 points another. You might get 20 points one week and then 5 points
Mitch
the
Wilson
next.
Effect.
Exactly. So I think the way that points are acquired through these positions is also something that managers need to keep in mind.
Yeah, and Vandy, that old commish over there will just share some of these stats with you. You don't have to write them all down and take notes already.
Buddy, don't you worry.
But hey,
he's writing his sticky notes.
Last thing that I kind of want to touch on was
you want to see my notes?
I don't want to see your notes. You're just gonna make me lose, okay? You're making me forget my point over here. Look, that's way better than the notes that I've taken, so you win there.
That's from my son, okay? Watch yourself.
Hey, I said it was a compliment.
That's
but
right,
what I was going to say with the centers is that, you got to remember that centers literally have calls and set pieces designed for them to have the ball. They are there. Will Leonard, JP Duplessis, Billy Meeks, all these guys are getting designed set piece plays for them to make gain line and gain meters. They're getting the ball on these plays, expecting to make meters, and that's why we're seeing that meters gain, and that's why, to Ryan's point, that's why they're going to be so consistent. They have plays designed for them, so they're going to have the ball in their hands at some point.
For sure. And then just looking at the center position last year, William Talitina was 1, Mark O'Keefe 2, Junior South 3, LaRue Milan 4, Laritz Vanderskiff 5. So again, you're seeing a lot of try scorers.
Yeah, and Mark O'Keefe was in the 15 too.
Mark O'Keefe was in the 15, yes, just not in the top 5 for center. So we're rewarding try scoring, but now we're also rewarding other elements that is very, I guess, pivotal and crucial, obviously, as shown here with who's in our top 5 at the center position. All right, well, let's move over to something a little bit more volatile here was what I was saying. And let's get to that back 3 position. Again, last year, the back 3, in addition to the kicker, was basically how fantasy managers were getting a majority of their points. And there was a whole lot of discrepancy between the top back 3s in our league versus kind of the lower end back 3s. So we'll take a look at the back 3s that are here in our top 5 for these new stats. Number 1, Ed Fidow. Number 2, Joe Peterson. Again, I'm going to put a little asterisk beside that because Joe Peterson also kicked. Renata Roberts-Tanana, number 3. Duncan Matthews, number 4. And Penny Lasaka at number 5. And then if we just compare that to last year's top 5, we got Ed Fidow, Joe Peterson, Mitch Wilson, Renata Roberts-Tanana, and Penny Lasaka. So we're just swapping in there Mitch Wilson for Duncan Matthews there.
I like the other one more because I had 3 of those guys.
So guys, initial kind of thoughts about this, seeing the top 5 back 3 players here up on the screen. Kind of initial reaction to that.
Ed Fidow deserves to be there.
Yeah, that is true. And he deserves to be, 30 points ahead of Joe Peterson?
I mean. Yep.
So he definitely deserves to be there.
30 points over Lasaka.
But these guys are ahead. Like, we can tell they're ahead, but it's not like last season to where these studs that are scoring tries are ahead and gone. Like, there is a 30, 50, 60 point drop off. Where here it's like, Ed Fidow I'd love to have, but hey, if I can't get him,
it's not a season ender.
It's not season ender. I lose 30 points with Joe. I can pick that up in another position where maybe I can get that stud, right? Yep. Now we're building those, I think, those studs in a more kind of less like, hey, I don't have him, I'm going to lose the season kind of.
Yeah.
Sure. And just comparing the spread to add to your point there, Matt, Ed Fidow in our fantasy format last season scored 117.2 fantasy points. The guy in 5th place, who was Penny Lasaka, coincidentally scored 65.6 fantasy points. So over 60, like almost like what you're saying, Matt, 60 fantasy points spread, basically double between number 1 and number 5. Here we've reduced that. Yes, it's still 45 or around 40 fantasy points, but their totals are much higher, so the percentage of their fantasy points isn't that much. Penny Lasaka is still reaching about 80%, not 85% of Ed Fidow's total, not half of it or less than half.
Yeah, and I mean, watching Ed Fidow, he deserves to be there. Like those last couple of games of that season.
Right.
We sure as hell were talking about Lasaka like we were Ed Fidow, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So, and what I love about this, and now that I guess all of our listeners and viewers have seen it all, and now that you guys, Vandy and Matt, have seen all of the rankings and things, and we've gone through it, I really like the fact that adding the metrics that we've added is doing exactly what we sought out for it to do. We knew that in our league we had a whole bunch of fantasy rankings or a whole bunch of scoring that was heavily reliant on try scoring and things like that. So we're seeing things like fly halves and kickers. We're seeing things like back 3 players really dominating our fantasy space because those were the players that were scoring tries and that were kicking points, fly half and back 3 respectively. But now we're just adding a little bit more value into that so that now we're not just having, these 2 positions just score all the points. All 5 positions are contributing. And the way that we've introduced these metrics, we're actually nerfing the 2 positions that were kind of getting a little bit away there and boosting up the other ones, which I think is exactly what we were looking to do when introducing these new stats to improve last year's season.
Yeah, like I think like my takeaway, I guess, from this episode would be like kind of a 2-point thing would be like, there's nothing worse than, I'll just use football Sunday morning, a couple big plays and you can look at it and go, my day's over, my week's over. And very rarely does it happen at 1:00. But damn, if Ed Fidow ran a 40-meter try at the first game, you're like, okay, well, that was fun. Like looking forward to next week already.
Right.
Now with these new metrics, sure, you don't have the constant update you would have football, but you can at least go, you know what? It's not over.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely not. There's still hope. Still, your day's not ruined. You're going to watch more rugby. You don't just write it off, worry about next week. And then I would say the other one is, with all the depth we've added, there's not such a major discrepancy between, let's say, first place and 8th place in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, let's say you were the second or the back row and you took Reichert Hadding at 3. You know what I mean? By the time it comes all the way back around, sure, you're going to get maybe a mid-pack center or something, right? So I think it really helps our draft now because now, like, I can't remember who it was last year. I think it was a second row player for the Giltinis, and he was like, damn well 2.5 points ahead of his guy. He went 3rd overall. I was going to take him 3rd overall, and then I ended up getting Joe. I can't even remember his name now.
I think you're thinking about Angus Cottrell.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
the back rower. Yeah.
And I remember seeing that, and I'm like, well, hell, I just missed out on the league winner there. Like, damn, man, that was the biggest fish in the pond.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. There, I think what it introduces too, Vandy, is that there's now multiple ways to win. You're not just winning a week. You're not just winning a week because a guy scored a bunch of tries. And I feel like that's what it was last year. Last year was a lot of like, all right, I'm just looking for guys who are going to be touching the ball down in the try zone. Like that's what I'm looking for. But now what you're saying, Vandy, if, Ed Fidau scores, 2 tries in one game, at least now, hey, I got Bill Meeks and he may, rack up 80 meters in this match, and that's still, 8 points. That's gonna tally up. You know what I mean? That's so, right. It's a good point.
And I would say, as like a new fan of the sport, this model of point scoring is going to make you enjoy the game more. Because exactly what you said, I found myself kind of losing myself a little bit when it was kind of, it's getting down in the, I don't know, the red zone or whatever. Sure. And it's a lot of, boom, boom, ball kind of sneaks out and you're like, okay, it's inevitably going to be a try. Like,
right.
And you're not really engaged at that point. I feel like this is going to really help me as a fan because, you're watching now. They have 2 tackles, 3 tackles.
Exactly. You're looking.
You're like, dang.
You're just not looking for the scoring play. You're now looking at every breakdown. Oh, who made that tackle? Who stole that breakdown? Who is running with the ball? Who's
that's just it. Who's just running? I had Tanana last year, and hell, man, that guy was all over the field, and but he never got it into the zone. He never got the try, and I'm like, oh, that was cool. Guy looks athletic as hell, but that was.
Exactly. But no, that's good. Matt, you got any? That was good.
Vandy, no, look, hey, you two spoke from the mind. You spoke from the heart. I couldn't have said it better myself.
That's right. You can't.
All right. Well, hey, as we wrap up the show here, obviously, I know, guys, that for those of you listening and watching, these stats episodes tend to be very number driven and stat heavy. That's why I thought to introduce some of those new graphics to kind of help you guys out. Let us know what you think of those stuff. But as we start to close out the show, guys, now that you've seen this, and now that you've seen the top 5s, now you've seen the impact that these new stats are having on fantasy rugby in the MLR. Strategy wise, now that you're starting to look ahead to 2023, not to give anything too much away to our fantasy league members, our Fantasy Ruckers league members that might be listening here.
Helped you enough.
But what are you now kind of looking at? What is kind of I know, Matt, last year your idea was like, okay, I want hookers. I want to get guys that are going to be involved at the breakdown, get guys that are going to be in that set piece and things like that. Now that that's not the sole focus and not as one dimensional, what is kind of that theme strategically that you're looking at, guys? Matt, I'll start with you, dude.
Hey, you got to start with centers. It seems like that's got to be the way, but I think for me, it's going to be start with the center, and everywhere else where there's the most disparity between positions like scrum half, positions like fly half, second row, those ones are really where we want to make sure that I'm filling those roster spots, making sure I'm getting a piece of one of those 3 if I can, or 2 out of the 3. That's kind of my strategy, I think, going into it right now. And got to get those centers.
Yeah, Matt hit the nail on the head. You gotta favor the guys who get you the points, and then more saturated positions now. Yeah. Worry less about them. Like a scrum half besides. I can't remember the top scrum half.
Well, that's opposite of me. I'm saying get those scrum halves.
See, for me, it was like you had your.
But hey, this is what it is. Differing. We can finally have differing strategies.
120. Yeah,
it's kind of the idea.
We can have differing draft strategies because we're not just looking for tries. We're looking for
last. I mean, first.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. No, that's a great point, Matt. It's not now about just finding the try scores. It's about a whole bunch of stuff that people need to keep an eye out for. And what that introduces is, yes, exactly that there are now different strategies. There's a whole bunch of ways that people can approach this draft that can be successful going forward, I think, with this. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how people approach that. And obviously we got some time till our fantasy draft. We've got a few months away here, but I think this is starting to get our taste buds going in terms of starting to think of and stew about how we're going to approach this 2023 fantasy MLR season. So should be a lot of fun. Again, thank you for all of you that are listening and watching. Had a lot of fun over the past few weeks breaking down these new stats and getting our hands on this. It's been a lot of fun. So moving forward here, we're going to continue trying to kind of shape this thing, try to clean it up and make fantasy rugby as accessible and I guess readily available for as many of you out there. We're still in the works of trying to do that, but we're definitely making strides and we're getting closer and closer every single week. And we're so excited to hopefully one day have everyone enjoy fantasy rugby the way that we do. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think that's what this stats is. The introduction of these stats is really starting to show is that fantasy rugby, there's a whole lot of potential for it, especially in the MLR.
Yeah, one guy. We just need one party to help us out. Just, one
a beer equation.
One part of this equation, 2 parts of this equation just need to help us out.
The beer sponsor and stats, the stuff we've been asking since day one. But hey.
We need to get a local brew company on here. All right.
Hey, what's local? We're all in 3 different places.
That is true.
What local are you talking about?
But, all right.
Local to the guy who has a beer every episode.
All right. Well, hey, let's close out the show here again. Guys, thanks again so much for all of you who are listening, who are watching. Please let us know if you're watching on the YouTube channel what you guys think of the new graphics. If that's something you want to see on a weekly basis. I'm hoping that that's something that we can do every single week, especially when we start breaking top 5 players on a weekly basis when fantasy MLR is in full swing. For Matt Yee, though, until then, Matt Yee, Devin Vanderpool, I'm Ryan Yee. We'll be back next week for another episode of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Going to be a lot of fun. We'll see you then.
We love you, Gilgronis and Giltinis.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.